Welcome everyone to the second episode of the Off the Record podcast, where we look beyond the books with the faculty. And today's guest is Mr. Thomas, our lovely vice principal.
Wonderful to have you.
Yes.
I thought we'd just start with, can you just a little bit introduction to yourself and who you are and what you do?
What do you really do here, Mr. Mr. Thomas?
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend a bit of time with you. And I think good question. So, what do I do? Okay, why have a vice principal for student life? I think there's a difference between the job description of one of these vice principal student life and the reality of what it looks like, and a lot of uncertainty about what you see when you walk around the corridors. I would say that most of the job, or most of the time, is designed to make sure that students are safe, that the school runs smoothly, that the student experience is a positive one. So a lot of the work I do is behind the scenes, not always front of house. I think you respond to different challenges when they come up. When there are concerns raised, whether that's from the student body, parent body, or faculty body, it's that job to better understand and investigate what's going on and to make sure that the right outcome is where we achieve.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds pretty good.
You approve?
I approve.
He likes your answer.
It's a worthwhile job.
I like the answer. So kind of starting off here.
Your education.
Well, yeah, your education. You want to tell us a little bit about that? Like
So
where
you're
you came
assuming
from?
I've got some education.
Yeah, I hope
Yeah,
so.
I
would
hope so.
This would be a
so.
rather unfortunate meeting.
Yeah, it would. Fortunately, I grew up in South Wales valleys and in Cardiff, so spent most of my time there and enjoyed going to secondary school. And it was it's a totally different secondary school to this experience at ISB is here. School was at Whitchurch High School. I was there from about 1981 to about 1990. And interesting enough, in that size of school, they've been able to turn out a huge prestigious list of alumni kind of students. And as we have at ISB, a number of those kind of former students have gone on to be very successful, either through sport or media or through health and medicine. So I did my GCSEs there, then moved to do some A-levels in a different kind of college because they didn't offer PE as an A-level at that time. And as you know, as a PE teacher and a background to that was something that was really important to me. So I started doing economics and geography and then decided that economics wasn't for me. So PE and geography is kind of where I went, which then led me into that kind of question, so what next? Back then, kind of early 90s, it was limited about what you could do with PE. You either taught, or you're a professional sports person, or you went into the military maybe. And I chose teaching. So
You didn't want to go to the military?
Not for you.
didn't seem quite appealing, if I'm honest now. I'm sure there's a lot of beneficial part to doing that. So picked a program that was left Wales. I thought it was important to leave Wales and go and experience something else. I went over the border to England, to University of Manchester Metropolitan University was at the time, and did a 4-year Bachelor of Education's degree focusing on PE and environmental science. Enjoyed that immensely, and then at the end of that, so what? But giving you that qualification that allows you to teach, that was the kind of direction I followed.
Yeah. And you went to high school in Cardiff, right, in Wales?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the largest, I think.
Yeah.
At that time, there was about 2,000 young people there, really diverse. I think that school has changed a lot since then. Mm-hmm. There was a lot more independence. You would walk to school. You would take 40 minutes or so to do that. You would do everything that is similar to it was today, but there seemed to be less support in place. You were very much on your own back then.
Yeah. And then ESPN actually called your school the school that breeds champions in 2018. And your school has had graduates like Gareth Bale, who's a professional football player, Sam Warburton. Am I saying that right?
Correct. So Sam is who was the Welsh rugby captain and also the British Lions captain.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then some others like Tour de France winner Geraint Thomas.
Correct. Yeah.
And Andrew Davis, who's a screenwriter like House of Cards, War and Peace, Pride and Prejudice, all that kind of stuff.
Pretty good lineup, I'd say.
Yeah.
And Seb, don't forget myself.
Of course.
You've got to go
He's
with
on top.
Vice principal of
On top.
student
He's
life.
on top.
There is that one.
Olympics.
I think you go above the 2 Olympic medalists.
It's a contentious debate. It's contentious debate. It still rages on today.
Gareth Bale
Controversial.
versus Mr. Thomas. Very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then But so do you think that this is just like a coincidence that your school just brings all these champions? Like when you look that school up, they have a whole list of like 50, 60 students that graduated that are doing all these like amazing things, like First Minister of Wales and all these other things. Do you think that's like a coincidence, or do you think that school is set up in a way for these people to succeed in that way, or anything like that?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I've been thinking about this more and more. And I think, what is it unique about that school that breeds champions? I mean, we breed very successful students. They go on, hold high public office, and our alumni at ISB are very successful. But when we talk about major kind of athletes outside of people like Kobe Bryant, for example, who are temporarily here for a period of time, I think the one thing that that school did was empowered you to be the best version of yourself that you can do. And if they could see talent or potential, they harnessed that. Whether they encouraged you to be part of something, whether or not they were there coaching you in a verbal kind of fashion, there was a lot of encouragement. I also think that Wales is quite a small kind of place in terms of opportunities and ambitions. And this idea to be able to be successful in order to then step outside of Wales to make a difference and to provide a good quality of life for you, I think there's a lot of internal, intrinsic drive to do that sometimes. So naturally, the sports talent is there. I think it's nurtured and coached. And I think back to my PE teachers, and I spoke about this at a graduation speech a few years ago. My PE teacher, I can still tell you about him today, a gentleman called Steve Williams. He's now in his 80s. But he was an inspiration to me. And it was and his message was just be the best version of yourself as possible. And I think if you start to believe or find an avenue that you're good at, naturally you'll start to succeed. So I don't think they've got a unique USP about breeding success, but there's something there that drives people and turns them in the direction that they could be successful in.
So obviously some of the people that Seb mentioned, they're sort of less academically geared, and they're more, sports and creativity. Do you think that ISB places too much value on academics and less on other areas which careers
fit better to some students?
Exactly.
I think that's a great question again, and I think that do we place too much focus? I think we are an IB World school. The program that we offer is a very demanding one. By nature, most of our students move through the NYP into the full DP program. And that's different from the UK system where you might do 2 to 3 A levels. Now you've got 6 subjects at higher or standard level, TOK, extended essay. So the nature of that means that there are more demands on you. I'm not convinced that I would be successful in that particular program as a number of you are. You're much more successful in that respect. I think we do offer a wide range of opportunities, and I think that there is more we could do. I think our sports program has grown, our performing arts, I think our media, I'm thinking about tech crew and those things. I think there's a place for everybody at ISB. But I do think that one of the things that we need to do is to recognize with people how they balance their plate. Because one of the challenges we have, if we've got the academic demands and yet we've got a drive to be successful in other areas, quite quickly that plate becomes full, and then that well-being aspect is kind of impacted slightly.
Yeah. And we might also have to watch out that we don't spread too thin, because if we go too far in one direction or we try to play the entire field, then maybe we start, like as a school, we start lacking in certain areas. Yeah. Like, do you think that could happen at this school, or would you, if that happened, would you start prioritizing something else over something else, you might think?
Again, a good question. I think that we could spread ourselves too thin. There is that risk of doing that. So, the next thing would be, how big do these programs go? And I think about the athletic program today. And as we're speaking, we've had schools from Israel and Cairo downstairs playing basketball. It's out of season. It's a large commitment to students. So you could have an athletic director come in and want to grow each one of the programs as you've got performing arts or music or any other aspect of that. So I think keeping them sustainable for a number of years so that students can get a consistent experience, but also then have the choice to kind of keep that balance would be important. So I think if we could see ambition and investment in one area, great, but I think there's other areas we could develop further as well, instead of just making our programs larger and bigger.
And so obviously you've mentioned, Israel and Cairo, they came to the basketball tournament. And obviously we are an IB World school, but do you think that we should be further integrated with the local Swiss system? Or do you think that our current system of sort of global mindedness works better?
We're an international school, but we're based in Switzerland, and I think we're based, in Basel land. And I think that there is some demystification about what we do and who we are, and that could be done via more community engagement. I think that it's not through lack of trying. I think that every time we get accredited, one of the pieces of feedback is that you need to develop your community relations a bit further. And we've tried that through service and orientation activities. We've looked at it through the sports lens. That was one of the early attempts to do that. But the setup of the Swiss school system for sport is different. They finish on a Wednesday afternoon. Their leagues and their kind of commitments and games are different. So it's not that easy to do. I think we have a moral responsibility to play our part and to be a member of a community, because most of us are just passing through it, whereas a number of people in the local system are here for life. So I think we could do a better job. I think we need to be creative. And one of the areas I think we could do is certainly get more of our students out of the building and into our community to do that.
I think that'd be valuable, because I remember in Fichen especially, because that was the closest interactions that people had with the Swiss, and there was often sometimes a bit contentious, like pine cone throwing.
Yeah.
At the like the Swiss kids were throwing them at us, and also on the tram you often hear, speaking Swiss German, that they're like, look at those ISB kids. So I think going out and interacting, not only in sport but in a social way with the Swiss could be helpful.
We stand out here. We don't necessarily all speak the language, and when we do travel, we quite travel in groups. And I think that especially when we're in those large groups, that's sometimes where we can be easily labelled and judged. And one of my hopes is that, although we're all ISB students, we're also ISB ambassadors. And I think that opportunity to just be mindful of that when we're around other people, and to recognise that although it seems very familiar to us, culture is different. There's lots of nuances in that, and about tolerance levels for us, because I do get the sense that we are judged as a privileged kind of group of people that come together. But, yeah, and the reality is that, okay, we do have privilege, but there's a lot of great talent and a lot of people willing to give back to the communities. So I think we're a little bit misunderstood at times.
It could be. Okay, and then kind of to go back a little bit, back to where you came from. So you graduated from the Metropolitan University of Manchester, or like the Manchester Metropolitan University. Yeah, and then you got a degree in environmental science?
Physical education and environmental science, yeah.
Exactly. And then you went on to teach a middle school in Essex, right?
It was a senior school, so my first teaching job, 1995, straight out of university at the age of 22. Into a non-selective Essex school with about 1,000 students in there. That was an eye-opener. That's a difference between learning your trade in a university or getting those skills and qualifications, but being able to apply them in the real world is quite different. So you go in, you are fresh, excited, you've got energy, you're young. The reality is that my first class was one that I was teaching A-level PE to, and the students in there were about to graduate at the age of 18, and I'm 22. And there's a 4-year difference between that. So that takes a bit of negotiating, a bit of planning in terms of that kind of relationship between student and teacher. But again, a different kind of school. It's not as diverse as ISB. It has a different set of kind of cultural identities or a much more limited view of them. And therefore, the relationships and the students were much more local. They were, they had their own challenges. A school is a school at the end of the day. When you work with young people, some things are the same and some things are different. But again, I thought it was quite a tough school. The rules and regulations weren't always followed. Students would come and go. Discipline was really kind of a big thing. So I think when you've had that experience of working in an environment like that, you absolutely appreciate the kind of students and the experience and the potential we've got at ISB.
Apologies. if you see that as a way to value your time here at ISB, is that one of the main reasons that you've stayed here, because of the students, or what has motivated you to stay for these 16 years?
That's a long time. And I think that there are a few staff that have been here a lot longer. And I think that what's great is that although that 16 years is split over 2 time periods, 2000 to 2007 was the first time I was here, and then returning in 2012. And I think having a 5-year break also gives you perspective. I've always appreciated both as a, that I've been fortunate to work at ISB. I continue to feel that way. I think that we have a unique environment and culture at our school, and that's very much driven by the students. And I think that you would be hard pressed to find a better student community anywhere else, because although there is privilege, although there's diversity, it seems to work. And that just sitting around the table today and having a chance to, again, build those relationships with students is super powerful. Respectful, they're educated, they're thoughtful, they want to do the best. So what a great way to apply your trade.
Yeah, and okay, well, so you said you took a 5-year break, right?
Yeah.
So you went with you worked with NEAT, children classes NEAT. So not
So
in
what is that?
education, not in education, employment, or training.
Seb, well done. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Good acronym.
Do your research.
I've done my research. And what made you decide to come back to ISB after doing that? And what was that experience like?
So the main driver for me leaving in the first place was to go home to Wales and to get married and start a family. And that was the right thing to do, and I'm very thankful to do that. And then, so when I went back, the thought was I don't necessarily want to do the same thing. It's important to broaden your horizons, to try something new. And therefore, in Wales, we have this kind of program, or in the UK, there are a number of students that don't attend school from the age of 16 to 19 for many reasons. There are barriers, whether that is their mental health, whether that's substance use, whether that is the fact that they are in the social care system. So a number of young people miss out on their education. So there are a number of initiatives and companies that are designed to try and re-engage young people in their learning. And that's what NEAT is. That means they're not currently in their education, employment, or training. The rationale, so that was a big learning curve. That was coming out of the classroom and going into managing teams and programs of people who were very resistant to wanting education. At ISB, education is still seen as that stepping stone and pathway to success in the future. But young people who don't have that kind of vision or drive or motivation see it as an inconvenience. So that motivation to get them back in is really important. The rationale for kind of leaving was that as my work continued over those years, I became much more removed from face-to-face working with students on a daily basis or young people. It would be around policy, it would be about lobbying, it would be around funding or bidding for things. And although that was a different direction, one of which I wasn't really experiencing, my reality and on a weekly and a monthly basis came back to the fact that my passion is working with young people on a direct level. So I had that kind of choice to kind of change. We went to a job fair, myself and my wife, and that was the first time I bumped into the director of ISB at that time for a number of years. And that it was the same time that they were opening fiefdom, and they were looking again for a PE teacher and a geography teacher, which is ultimately what my wife is. And we decided to come back as a family. And that 5-year break has allowed us to come back both as a teacher, but also now with our children, one of which is graduated from ISB, and one who's currently in grade 7. Sorry.
Obviously, like, when you joined ISB in 2000 and then again in 2012, there must have been a lot of differences in how the school is operated and run. What do you think the biggest differences were, and has it changed for the better or the worse, do you think?
I would consider that kind of time frame as an evolution. Whether it's better or worse, I wouldn't say that it's either
different.
one of those. It's different and it's evolved. I would say that in the early years, it was much smaller. We didn't necessarily have the Rheinach campus. We were spread over different parts of the canton. The senior school was in Eschenplatz in a tower block. The senior school was in, out towards Jakob Park. But with the numbers being smaller, it felt more like a family. The students knew each other better. The teachers knew their students better. Class sizes were a bit smaller. We still had trips and sports and drama and those kind of things, but it felt more of a family because we were closely connected. Fast forward another 10, 12 years, the investment and the growth makes ISB feel slightly different. whereby we still have wonderful students, teachers, and opportunities, but that family feel, it feels a little bit less personal at times. And you can imagine just in the senior school ourselves, whereas we used to have 200 students, we've now got over 530 there. And if we feel that relationships are the key cornerstone to success and a happy school, then that's one of the risks we've got to manage a bit more.
Speaking to relationships,
Yeah, keep going.
you talked about how one of the main drivers of wanting to leave your job at NEET
Yeah.
was that you no longer felt that one-on-one connection with the students who you wanted to interact with, helping them day to day. Do you see that your job has evolved now that you're vice principal of student life, that you no longer get that one-on-one? You feel like you're directly interacting with these students day to day. Do you think this is positive development, or you're more valuable as a on the field helping the kids in their moment of need?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate, and I recognize I'm fortunate to have this job. And the reason for that is that it gives me that balance, and it provides me that balance to both work with young people and to support them, but also to try behind the scenes to kind of shape opportunities for them. And I think that balance works well for me. I still teach. I have a grade 9 class and teach wellbeing. And that itself allows me to still stay relevant in terms of being in the classroom. I would worry if I had a different role that didn't allow me to work directly with students. I would probably feel the same way, that I wasn't being challenged or fulfilled enough in that respect.
Well, I kind of want to ask, like, you work with the kids in Essex,
Yeah.
and then at the beginning with the kids from NEET. With these kids, probably a lot of challenges and all that kind of stuff. Was there like some kids that would really give you like an eye-opening experience or something like that, where you're like, this is really like...
This is why you got into the...
Yeah, exactly. This is like why I did this, and this really like something that just had such a big impact on you. It kind of just changed your view of how societies run, or your life or whatever.
I think each of those kind of 3 stages, if I think back to my early time of teaching, again, looking and working with young people who can just prove you wrong, that sometimes, that they have that desire and drive to get themselves out of a situation that they don't want to be in. That middle part between the 2 ISB experiences was a real eye-opener, because part of the work we would do is we would be given funding for different projects, and that would include being able to start things up. So you may have part of the organization say to you, listen, we've got X amount of money. You now need to go and work with these people and develop a program or employ people to do that, and you need these set of outcomes. And some of those were young people who didn't want to be in school, but some of them were so far off that area to re-engage them in learning was quite significant. And 2 of those groups that stand out to me that have really been quite powerful. One has been a traveling community. And they're people that just don't live that regular lifestyle. They don't attend school. They don't live in their normal kind of household arrangements that we have. And their relationships with their parents and family is quite different. And they don't want to go to school. They don't really want to be found. And when you work with them and you're able to try and re-engage them, that's very powerful. The second group, and this sounds really kind of bizarre, is a young people who are at risk of being involved and being sucked into the sex trafficking kind of trade. And one of the projects that we had was that we would try and work with young people who are at risk of selling their services or prostituting themselves, and that to try and bring them back into breaking that cycle of what was one direction they could go, but to see the value of education. And that was very powerful. And if you can appeal to people and they can make those choices, that's really fulfilling. And then ISB, on the other side of that, is I've always recognized that, we are an independent school, we are an international school, but we're also quite similar to a state school. And where we do have socioeconomic kind of differences within our community, that doesn't define us as a group of people. We see each other for who we are, regardless of color, race, religion, cultural differences. And that's very powerful. And the difference here, out of all the others, is that we have a very engaged, educated, and supportive parent body. And when you work with people like that, they see the benefit much more easily and much more supportive of the work that you do.
think we can now go to a more controversial question for
I
you.
was waiting.
So a big issue at the school has been the issue of the dress code.
Yes.
And I think that it is often seen by the student body, at least, that it's rather two-sided. There's the students versus the faculty, or specifically the administration, is seen as antagonists in some sense. Do you think there's a way that students can feel that their wishes are heard and what they feel as who they are, like, respected?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that all of our teachers and the leadership team respects young people, respect our students.
That's good.
And that's a given. The issue of dress code is one that balances the importance of what we're trying to do, which is promote identity, promote an opportunity to self-express in different ways, and yet also help prepare young people for the fact that there is a post-ISB place for them. And when they leave ISB, they're still going to need to have those skills and abilities to work within whatever framework that is. Rules, regulations about whether or not they have to be in the office on time, whether or not they have to wear a suit to work. I think what has happened is that dress codes and some of the expectations around technology use, society is moving at such a fast pace, both pre and post-pandemic, that I think we need to be really open-minded about whether or not that defines or impacts negatively the culture and relationship we have with our students. And I say that because I think back to the working community now and thinking about probably people like your parents. In the past, turning up at the office had a set of expectations that go with that professional set of dress, whether it's a jacket, a tie, trousers, whatever that was. Now, most organizations and corporations don't define success and staff culture by what they wear. And I think that we probably have to align that to a changing world and with technology as well. Well, we know that technology use is something that we are trying to find a solution to and work in that balance with the students. The rationale as educators is that the fact that screen time is something that absolutely impacts people's well-being, either positively or negatively. So I think all of those student expectations need to evolve, but we need to be more open-minded.
But saying like you want them to express their personality and identity, right, through what they wear, maybe limiting what they can or cannot wear, and stuff they want to wear
There's a limit on their identity.
Exactly, like saying, kind of pushing them into a category that they have to be this person, dress this way, and look like this to be prepared for this corporate or like this other world. What if they don't want to go that direction? And what if this is like their expression, and that might be able to change to wherever they go or however they might live? And by limiting that, isn't that like, kind of contradictive to saying?
I think the dress code, and let's remind ourselves that it has had student input into that. The whole process was built from the ground up, which includes a student working group to do that and to advocate for it. And then ultimately, as a school, it needs to align itself over those three campuses. And dress means different things at each area of our school, whether it's junior, middle, or senior school. We've got a set of guiding principles, and those guiding principles, personally, I believe, has flexibility for students to express themselves. There are a couple of kind of exceptions to that about certain things that shouldn't be there, whether that is whether you choose to wear something that's offensive to other people, whether it's drug-related, whether it's racially motivated. So I think there's that cultural piece. And whereas the rights and responsibilities for that dress code is important, it's also important that we recognize that we choose as a school not to enforce a uniform. We don't want a uniform. We don't want to go down that route. And that's one of the unique experiences. So I think most of the people will have flexibility in that dress code to express themselves in that way. There's always going to be a percentage of people who feel that they want greater flexibility and deserve that flexibility. But I think that wherever you go in life, there are some expectations at which need to be met. But again, I think it's important that we review, we reflect, and we're honest with each other what works well and what doesn't work so well.
I think another issue is the lunch line, which I think Seb and Rain have both been victims of from time to time.
It is quite frustrating at times.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue. It's a crisis at our institution, our hallowed institution.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Being down there are 15 minutes twice a day where we're trying to allow 500 students to eat, to get served, and do those things. We have looked at different options. We continue to look at different options. Lunch is 50 minutes generally, apart from on a Wednesday. Trying to appeal to people not all to go at once is one thing, but the reality is lunch is very late in the day and people are hungry. So we do need to look at our schedule. We need to review that. We need to, whether it's a system approach, whether it's a schedule approach, we need to do that because we know already that it does impact people's stress and anxiety to want to run down there. We have, by the way, tried to implement things to speed the process up, which include the use of cashless cards and also deregulating the fact that actually for sandwiches and snacks that they're served in different location. But again, I recognize that we've got more conversations to look at that.
And then kind of when we were ending with Mr. Hoke, we kind of asked him what kind of things he would do for like team building and exercise. And then he was talking about whitewater rafting or something like that since he was licensed. Yeah. Do you have any ideas for team bonding or team building with the faculty as well so that they get, closer, better work relationship and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think what it shows us is the fact that we offer things and we kind of guess what people want. I take ski camp as a classic example of that. We do it. We hope that camp experience helps bond, but not everyone likes the activities. So I think we need to try and cater for the masses. I think the opportunity to engage in a way around areas that you enjoy. I think more cross-grade level interaction is super important. I think that we are quite, within the grades, we do a reasonable job at doing that, but the 11th and 12th graders as potential leaders have a lot to offer our kind of 8th grade and 9th grade as they come up as well. So I think diversity of that would be super important, but also recognizing that we're not going to meet everyone's expectation, but certainly widen that. And whether that's through food, whether that's through social gatherings, we've got prom coming up. Student Council continue to run these great activities, and thank you for doing
our glorious Student Council. Praise be.
And then charge us 55 francs for prom tickets.
Inflation is tough. You must understand, we're struggling.
55 francs.
It's been hard on us
50.
all, Seb.
Yeah.
And how many slippers did you order?
200.
Okay.
Long and short of it, I think if there are suggestions that come from the student body about things that we could do to improve or things that build community, that's really important because community's definitely been impacted by post-COVID. People seem to have, in some occasions, less empathy, less tolerance, less resilience. And I think if we're responding to some of those things, through planned activities, be welcome to get some suggestions.
And so students often have a lot of demands, but obviously you, as in your job, you can't offer everything to everyone all the time. And what do you feel when you can't offer a student body something that they really want, or you're just unable to meet what they're expecting?
Well, I think it's important to reflect upon what is it the student body want. Is it something that we can do? What are the constraints upon that? Whether it's funding, whether it's space, whether it's time, whether it's our schedule. But where there are possibilities to do that and promote student leadership, we absolutely need to do that. But again, we have to do that in an authentic way. We can't just turn around and say, yes, we do it, and then not empower young people to do that. So I think it's recognizing that when suggestions come through, and if there are limited constraints that go with that, we should really look at it and have that conversations until we make that final decision.
Speaking to suggestions, I think it's often a bit tricky that suggestions often come top down from teachers to students through, for example, some behavior notifications on Veracross.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a certain system that could be implemented to make it that the students can give feedback in a manner that is perhaps anonymous directly to the teacher?
Because we like,
it feels a bit one-sided at times.
Like one-sided, and there's definitely people that would have very constructive feedback.
And it's often a bit tricky if you just go up to the teacher and say it could be taken as being like insubordinate or disrespectful, whereas often the criticism is seen that if it comes from the teacher, it just has to be accepted. It's just that's the word of the law. When I think there should be a bit more dialogue.
It all comes back to the relationship between teacher and student at the end of the day, and is it a respectful relationship? And you would hope that all of our students feel comfortable talking to their teachers about those things. I'm under no illusion that's probably not the reality. So the question is, should we implement a system? I think we should give choice and opportunities for students to feed back about how they're feeling. We try and do that in some ways. We have the teacher surveys. That's one way that people do that. I think there's a difference between anonymous feedback and also feedback by name. We have the well-being check-ins.
Yes.
We have kind of conversations about different things. So whether or not there has to be a set system, but platforms where if students have concerns, you would hope in the first case they do talk to the teacher. If there's not a resolution after that point, then really that's what a leadership or management team should be about. Should be able to help facilitate, advocate, and broker those conversations. But again, whether or not Veracross is the right tool to do that, I'm not so sure.
So you're not in favor of a teacher behavior notification?
Oh, I would be. As an admin person, I have feedback. I have a feedback kind of process that comes every couple of years. Personally, I feel I grow as part of that feedback. It's important that people don't, whether students or teachers, don't feel threatened about that, and it's taken in a constructive manner, because we can all grow.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important that we consider how that feeds into what we do.
Okay, I feel like that's a pretty good note. Unless you guys have any extra questions or anything.
I think the question about if you could give us some quality Welsh phrases, I think that's a good way to end it. You know, you've got your culture, your
Nice little full circle.
Let's
full
go,
circle.
yeah. Within, I'm not a Welsh speaker per se. I think the important thing to know is that there are English speakers in Wales. There are a couple of things that you would say if you're in the school day, just some greetings, formalities. If you know, one of the things I would always say to a student in corridors is hi, a hello, and that would be shemai.
Shemai.
Good morning would be bore da.
Bore da.
Good afternoon, prynawn da. Then we've got these kind of little kind of Welshisms, which might be, for example, you would go there and hear someone say something ridiculous, and they might say, "Whose coat is that jacket?" or "Whose coat is that jacket?"
Yep.
And then, obviously, without finishing, it's important. I challenge you to just say probably the longest Welsh place name, which is Llanfar, Pwllgwyn, Gillgogern, Llandrobo, Llantysillion, go.
Ryan, I think you got to try this first as a brother, sister nation.
That should be a team bonding, a student-teacher bonding trip to that place. Yeah. I'm not going to try.
Without being able to.
Oh, Rain, please try.
Ryan, I got it.
Oh, I think
for King Charles, yeah, King George. For Lizzie.
For Lizzie. I don't even remember what you said. It's
Did someone fall asleep behind the mic?
No. I'm still here. I'm very much paying attention. It's a very long name.
Well, why don't you run Rain through what to say?
Yeah. So let's break it down again. So Llan,
Fire,
Pwll,
Gwyn,
Gich,
Gogerin,
Llanta,
Xanta,
Silion, go.
Go.
Okay, you got it. Let's go, Ray.
I've already forgotten it.
Santa, go.
Llanfar,
Llanfar,
Llandrobo, Llantysillion, go.
Just imagine that came from my mouth.
Okay, well,
perfect.
Sounds like a great note to end on. Thank you so much for coming here and speaking with us and going over some controversial topics with us as well. And really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
And Seb, Noel, and Ray, appreciate the time as well. It's a great project. So thank you for inviting me down today.
It's great to be interviewed for a positive reason. So
yeah,
I think.
And on that note,
goodbye.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys.